mics. If anyone is listening to us on YouTube, I'm going to apologize in advance for this episode that I'm moving like a robot and I have a heat pack on my neck because I've hurt my neck and it's a bit stiff and sore. So if you see me moving in a strange way or pulling any faces, that's probably just been a little bit of pain.
So I won't take it personally then.
No, it could be that as well. I'm joking. Oh my gosh, it hurts to laugh.
Becca,
Hmm.
what are we going to talk about today?
Actually, my mentioning of my neck pain could be a good segue to this because the reason I have the seat pack on is to help it recover.
I didn't think that's where you were going with that, actually, but I'm impressed.
It was smooth, wasn't it?
It was smooth.
Yeah, we're talking about recovery today because last time we spoke a bit about our stories. So if you haven't listened to that episode, I'd recommend you go and listen to it so you can know a bit more about who we are and what our experiences have been. And today we thought we'd talk about being recovered slash the process of recovery.
Yeah, I'm up for that.
Where do we start? I was thinking what could be a good place to start is for you, Katie. What does it mean to be recovered? To class yourself as recovered? How does that look for you?
It's a good question. I will say it looks how I hoped it would look. Where I am now, I didn't think that was going to be possible for me, and I was willing to settle for like half of that, which, just for more clarity, I would say the biggest thing for me is brain space. I knew when I started recovery how much my brain was consumed with thinking about food, micromanaging it, my body, what people were thinking of my body, how I felt in my body. Like there was very little, if any, room for anything that wasn't to do with that. And I actually remember in recovery when I started noticing the quietening of all that intense food noise. What do I think about now? What do, what do I do with all this space? This feels weird. I would say recovery for me, I think brain space, the food freedom that comes with that, has got to be the biggest thing because I don't think I appreciated how small my world was, and that when you're not thinking about food and when you're not thinking about your body, you can actually show up, connect with people, you can be present in your day-to-day life, you can experience the world in a very different way. And I know that's probably going to sound a little bit cliche, and I don't want it to sound like you recover and everything in your world is great, but I have my own back now. I have solidarity with myself and I have a much stronger sense of who I am. Does that answer your question, Becca?
It does. It does. And the mental headspace that you're referring to is so relatable. That is something that I actually thought about myself when I was thinking about this episode and how would I describe being recovered. That was what I felt too, because I remembered living with an eating disorder was it was all I thought about. So from the moment I woke up to the moment I went to sleep, I remember literally I would wake up and the first thought I would have in the morning was something along the lines of what I would eat for that day or how I planned my food to be for that day. And then probably the first thing I would do would be go and weigh myself. And then the end of the night when I was lying in bed to go to sleep, the last thought would be like I would close my eyes and literally visualize everything I'd eaten for that day. And I'm quite a visual person, so I guess that's why I visualized it. And I would look at the food that I'd eaten for that day and decide had it been a good day or had it been a bad day, and what would I need to do tomorrow in terms of exercise or how much would I need to eat the next day based on what that visualization looked like for me before I went to bed. And being recovered is not living with that
Yes.
because it's exhausting. It's you don't realize it at the time because maybe you do at a certain point in the recovery process, you do realize how exhausting it is.
Mm.
But perhaps like when you are really in the thick of an eating disorder or in the earlier stages of recovery, you don't realize how exhausting it is because it's just become a way of being. It's just become a way that you think and the way you carry yourself through the world. So it's become so normalized. But when you're out of that and you're not living with that, it's, oh my God, that's so nice to have freedom.
Yes, absolutely. I couldn't have relayed that better myself. I think everyone will relate to that and feeling like I couldn't go to sleep until I'd made sense of my day.
Mhm.
Even if it ended in a binge, I could go to sleep if I'd planned how I was going to come back from that the next day. And I will say that in the recovery stage itself, letting go of that was really scary for me. I don't know whether you felt the same. And although I didn't want to think like that, the idea of not thinking like that, I guess I could say so long as I was micromanaging my food in that way, it offered me that sense of control around it. So the idea of if I didn't pay attention to my food, if I wasn't vigilant with it, then as a result, surely that would mean I was out of control.
I think for me, it was more of a process over a
Mm-hmm.
period of time. And then I started to realize I was getting more
Mm-hmm.
mental headspace. And I started to notice that I wasn't falling asleep and visualizing that, or perhaps the first thing in the morning wasn't centered around food. So I don't know if I felt the same sense of it being scary to let go of that because it felt more like a natural process
Yeah.
that happened based on other things I was doing as part of my recovery. But I think when I was thinking about being recovered before this episode and what that looked like, it felt like there was two main pieces for it for me. There was the piece around food,
Mm-hmm.
and being recovered for me around food looks like food not having that moral value attached to it.
Yeah.
And it looks like being able to eat for many different purposes. It's being able to eat for to fuel my body for health. It's also being able to eat for satisfaction and for enjoyment, for social occasions. It is a reward. It can be used to celebrate, and it also can be used for comfort as well. So the way I eat has expanded in it serves many different purposes rather than purely for weight loss or weight maintenance, or on the other side, entirely for emotional regulation. The purpose behind eating has expanded.
Probably when I was in my early 20s and I was definitely going into the fitness side of things and it all became about macros. I remember kind of phrase going around of food is fuel. It became food is there to fuel your body. It serves no other purpose than that. And I always felt very conflicted with that because that's not how I'd experienced food. It made me realize when I began recovery, thinking about food the way that you're expressing thinking about food, how disconnected I was from myself because I had no real sense of knowing when I was satisfied with food or knowing when I was enjoying food because the foods that I enjoyed I was binging on and I felt I needed to avoid. Satisfaction was hard to come by because I was eating foods that I thought I should be eating. Socializing was filled with anxiety around food. Preempting, what do I have? What don't I have? People are going to ask questions. I can't eat. And I don't know if this is the right word, Becca, so you may have a different way of thinking about it. But for food now to feel simple,
Hmm.
for it to just be something that I actually don't pay that much attention to, not to say that I don't think about it because I do. Eating is so much simpler than what it ever used to be.
I think that ties back to what you were saying around having more headspace. Because if
Mm.
food is simpler and it doesn't require as much attention, it doesn't take up as much brain space, does it? It's just one piece of something that you think about in your day, but not everything that you think about
Yeah.
in your day. And then I think there's the other piece. There is the food piece in recovery, but then there is also the other big piece is around body image healing. I think
Mhm.
that's for me, that was a crucial part of recovery and part of being recovered. I
Mhm.
feel it's having acceptance over my body as it is now. Maybe not loving every single part of it, all the time, but having acceptance of
Mm-hmm.
what my body looks like right now and treating my body with respect and not placing my entire self-worth on my body. That was a huge one because I obsessed over my body so much and I almost viewed myself as an object. And that was what I had to offer the world,
Mm.
how I looked. There wasn't really anything else I had to offer to the world other than my body. And now that's not how I feel. I feel I have many other attributes to give to the world. And something in my recovery that really helped me with this in realizing how much self-worth I placed on my body was, I think it's actually a CBT technique. And I was doing it in a self-help workbook I had. And I had to draw a pie chart. And you had to draw the segments of the pie chart
Mm-hmm.
in terms of how much you're nodding. It looks like you're
Yes, I've
familiar with
done that
this. Yeah.
before.
Yeah, so you have to draw segments in your pie chart depending on how you value yourself. So it
Mm-hmm.
could be one section could be friends because you place your worth on being a good friend or something like that. And I did this, and oh my gosh, the segment around how much I viewed my body. And as part of that, being sexually desirable
Mm-hmm.
to men and would somebody find me attractive?
Yep.
That was a huge part of that pie chart. And this was really effective for me because one, it took a lot of effort to be honest, because you have to be really honest with yourself when you're doing these exercises,
Mm.
because you could draw different segments and say, I value myself based on being a good friend. But if that's not really true, the exercise isn't going to be very helpful.
Yeah.
So I had to draw that, yeah, being a good friend holds less value for me than I look fuckable.
To put it
And
bluntly.
that, to put it bluntly, and it's horrible because
Mhm.
took a lot of effort to be that honest, because it's not very
Mhm.
nice to be that brutally honest with yourself and acknowledge these parts of yourself that you don't like. But once I had the courage to do that and I stepped back and looked at it, it was shocking. It was eye-opening for me. And it was something I needed because it made me go, I don't want that. I don't want to value myself based on
Mhm.
that. I want more in there. I want to value myself for more than that. So it was a really quite a big turning point for me in doing that.
Yeah, I there's something about putting it down on paper, I think, that can be quite eye-opening. And I noticed that, I mean, I know it's different putting it on paper, so this may not even be relevant, but I notice like when I talk with clients and they say they talk about themselves a certain way, and when they hear you relaying it back, it throws them a bit because being faced with it
Hmm.
right in front of you, that can be quite jarring. And I was very aware later on, nearer towards recovery, that my value was very much tied into my body. I didn't realize there'd be so much resistance to let that go.
Mm.
There was a part of me that was like, yeah, okay, I could be kind and I could be funny and I could be like all of this stuff, but I don't really care. I just want the body. That's still settling. That's what it
Hmm.
felt like, which is why a lot of recovery for me personally was understanding body neutrality and offering myself the option that I don't have to love my body. I don't even have to accept every part of my body. I don't have to attach to it in the same way. I don't have to make it my whole identity. That's what I was chipping away at a lot with my body image healing work. That was a lot of untangling for me to do. I don't know about you, but it was facing these things head on.
Hmm. Yeah. What you say about body neutrality, that was something that was very helpful for me
Mm.
in recovery as well. Part of that was instead of focusing on how my body looked,
Hmm.
shifting my focus onto what my body could do. That was a
Hmm.
really helpful kind of way of reframing the way I thought about my body.
Yeah.
And I appreciate it could be tricky for some people
Mm.
because you may focus on what your body can't do, and it can still be, oh,
Mm.
my body can't do this. And it could lead to a difficult relationship. But for me personally, I found that helpful. And it didn't always have to be a big thing that my body could do. It could just simply be my body woke up today and it carried me through the rest of the day, even though I was feeling a bit tired. Something like that. It could be really
Yeah.
simple. And that made me start to develop that respect and care for my body and to
Hmm.
not focus on how it looked.
Yeah, I hear that. For full transparency, I remember being told that before by a therapist, and I must have been in my teens, and in no way was I ready to hear something like that because I just eye rolled. Now I have access to that. I have access to it now, but in the moment I definitely didn't. And I don't know whether that's
Yeah.
because I really just I just need to look a certain way. Even if I look a certain way and I just exist, at least I look that way. Does that make sense?
Mm. Like I say, I don't think focusing on functionality of your body is helpful for everyone. I have seen
Mm.
other people say they've been suggested this by their therapist and a similar response to you of, no, can't do that. I have heard people also say it didn't help me because when my body wasn't cooperating in the way that I wanted it to a certain day, or if someone is perhaps living with sort of chronic illness,
Mm.
I appreciate that this approach can have an ableist slant to it. But for me personally, it was helpful in just moving away from obsessing over how my body looked and moving away from self-objectifying.
Yeah. Do you think if you'd have heard that said to you in your teens, you would have responded the same way, or do you think there was something about timing for you hearing that?
I think there was probably something about timing.
Hmm.
And I think what was important is nobody told me to do it.
Ah, okay.
Just did it myself. Like I did
Yes.
see people talking about it
Hmm.
online, and I thought, yeah, okay, I'm going to give that a go. But nobody said to me, Rebecca, go away and do this, because that probably would have got me a bit more defensive, and I'd have been like, don't tell me what to do with my body.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
I came up with it myself.
Yeah, you know what? I think you speak something really helpful there about that, like rebellion part of you that's you won't tell me what to do. I will get there myself. I think that's probably that would have had an impact for you as well, being able to get there yourself.
Yeah. I think a lot of recovery for me was um so I did have therapy. This therapy was largely person-centered. It was more focused around the PTSD that I was experiencing,
Mm.
not so much on the eating disorder. And I did bring that to the therapy sessions. And my therapist's response was, this is a byproduct of the trauma. So we need to focus on the trauma. And then the binging and the purging will change. And that
Oh.
didn't quite happen. And then I did have CBT through the NHS and was on antidepressants as well for bulimia at the time. And I didn't find that particularly helpful either, because I think it was more the setup of the therapy. It was online. I had to do a lot myself, and then
Mm.
therapists would check in with me via email. It felt quite impersonal.
Yeah.
And it also felt like it was very much geared towards younger people. So I was probably like 24 at the time. And there was exercises in this CBT program um, that were like one of the exercises I remember was an alien lands on Earth and you need to tell this alien what humans look like. And the purpose behind it was to try and get me to describe like a quote unquote normal body. But it just felt, I didn't want to do it. It felt patronizing
Mm.
and just not appropriate. But maybe for somebody else who is of a younger age, that might have been a really great activity,
Yeah.
but not
Yeah.
for someone in their mid 20s.
No.
So I didn't find that helpful. I would say a lot of the shifts I started to see in recovery were later down the line when actually I decided to take control over my own recovery and I
Mm.
did my reading and sort of looking online and started doing self-help books. So I don't know whether at the time those experiences with therapists weren't particularly helpful, but I don't know if they were doing something in the background, which
Hmm.
then I did feel the benefits of later down the line. But recovery really started to shift when it was coming from me. So a bit like if we go back to the whole focusing on the functionality of the body, that came from me. It was an idea from me, so therefore it was effective for me. And that's what it felt like when I started to take control But that's not to say that's how it works for everyone. Some people's experience of recovery would be completely different.
It's so interesting listening to your experience of recovery and how mine was different, but we've ended up in the same place. And I love that because there is not a one size approach. And for me, I remember starting to see things on Instagram about binge eating. I don't know how they found me, what phones are like. And it did to the effect of what you were saying. I think it started planting a few seeds in my brain because I will say that I think I was in denial of my binge eating for a very long time. I felt a lot of shame, and I think a lot of people do. I really was in a lot of denial as to the fact that this was my experience. This is what I was dealing with. I definitely invalidated my whole experience. I didn't want to believe that this was an eating disorder that I was struggling with. But when I eventually did decide to reach out for support, for help with a coach, I really needed like that intense support. I'm going to say I surrendered to the process. I wouldn't say that I mean that I surrendered and it just was easy. I don't mean it in that way. I just mean I was very, it was like very regimented for me. I was like, I'm doing recovery. This is what I'm doing. And I'm working with this person. I'm committing to it. And everything that she said to me, I was like, yep, I'm taking it on. You just tell me what to do. I need to not really think about it. I really needed her to say to me, think about it like this. How about this? Yes, you can do this. I took everything she said as gospel, whether that's good or not, but I really needed to relinquish any kind of thinking. And I think that's because I was like, I talk myself out of this. I would say to myself, just let yourself eat. There was mental restriction going on because there was oh, you can have this, but there was a limit on everything. But I always talked myself out of it after 1 or 2 days. I was like, no, I can't do this. I can't do this. And I really needed someone to hold my hand and pull me along. That's what I needed. I was going to say, I don't think I had it in me to do it by myself, but I think that comes across as I don't view it as me being less than. I think everyone needs a different level of support. And for me, I really needed that intensive. And I just think that's really interesting compared to your experience.
On the surface, they look completely different. You're saying you worked with someone, and I'm saying I did a lot on my own. But actually, I don't think they are that different because what's underlying both of them is that we were both dedicated to wanting to recover and were
Yes.
willing to really put that time and effort in.
Mhm.
So I don't think it matters how that actually looked because if I'm totally honest, when I was working with therapists, I don't think I was really fully dedicated to wanting to recover because at that time I was still feeling the benefits of the eating disorder. There were things about the eating disorder that I liked. I wanted to keep in my life. It was still serving a purpose for me. And when I got to the point where I was doing a lot of recovery on my own, I'd got to the point where I was sick of it. I was done. I was like, this is
Yeah.
exhausting. I don't like how much this is taking up mentally. I don't like how I'm living my life, and every single action I take is dictated by
Mhm.
how I look or what I eat. So I got to the point where I was sick, and then I became committed. And it just so happened that meant I was working on my own doing it.
Yeah.
But that's what's underlining both of them really. And maybe if I'd gone back to therapy, I would have had a great experience and been able to get to the point of being recovered because that was underlining it. Because I'm in therapy now for other things and I am finding therapy really effective.
Yeah.
But my mentality going into therapy is quite different to how it was before.
Yes. Yes. I think what you're speaking to is that readiness for it. There were times before I committed to recovery that I wanted it, but as you say, the eating disorder was still offering me more than the
Mhm.
thought of recovery. I wanted recovery to stop the binging, but I didn't want to let go of restriction. I don't think that's really possible. So would you say your readiness was like a gradual and it was linked to the exhaustion that you talk about that I really relate to? Or did you have a moment, like a pivotal moment where you're like, okay, I'm done. I have to try something else.
Bit of both, which might not even
Mm-hmm.
sound like it makes sense. I feel I feel like that readiness was a gradual process of getting more and more fed up with
Mm.
how I was feeling and more exhausted. And then I did an online, it's like a 30-day online course, which was with
Mm.
other people, and it was
Mm-hmm.
around recovering from binge eating. And I
Mm-hmm.
said, I'm going to do this. I'm going to try this, and I'm going to commit to doing it every single day. And on top of doing it, I'll also bring in other things that I think might help. So I didn't
Mm-hmm.
just stick to that course. I also wanted to go fully all in with it. So I started bringing in some of my own ideas too, and started to feel loads better for it. So after that 30 days, there was the option you could continue and have more one-to-one coaching and do a different course, which was much more intense and more personalized. But at the end of that 30 days, I didn't feel like I needed it. And I just continued doing things myself, putting in kind of
Mm.
working through workbooks that I'd found and just working on recovery on my own. So it was a bit of a mixture really, because it was a gradual build up to getting fed up, but then I committed to that one course as like that this is my point here. I'm gonna go for it myself. And then it led on from there.
Yeah, we definitely absorb more than we realize we're absorbing. I don't know about you, but I've had people ask me, like, oh, did you have a finite moment where you were like, I'm recovered now? And and it's so unhelpful, but I'm like, no. Sorry, I don't. For me, with recovery, there was certain shifts I wanted to experience by way of not thinking about food so much and experiencing food freedom and the body neutrality. But I think it's an ever-growing thing.
Yeah, I don't think I woke up one day and went, oh, this is the day I am recovered. Didn't. And I say that just to be a bit silly because I understand that desire to really want to have that
Yes.
moment where you feel like, oh, I
Yes.
recognize I'm recovered. I do. So I don't
Yes.
want to trivialize that. But no, I didn't. It was more of a gradual
Mm-hmm.
process where I started to notice food noise and body image noise just started to get
Mm-hmm.
quieter and take up less space, and other things started to come into my life, and my life started to I'm laughing because it might sound a bit silly, but it started to have a bit more colour to it. And I know that sounds really silly, but genuinely had more colour to it
I love that.
and just had more interests, more things that I was doing with my life.
Mm.
So I don't think this idea that there is a moment when you suddenly
Mm.
become recovered is particularly helpful to attach to, but I understand why people do attach to it. But I think it's much more of a gradual process. As part of that, I also think it's really important to acknowledge that even when you are recovered, I still have bad body image days.
Mm.
Like I do. And there's some days where I do struggle with how I look and I'm not happy. It doesn't affect me in the same way because my worth is not so attached to my body. And I also have now the experience to know this will pass. This is going to be 1 day or 2 days, but it will pass. It will not stay like this. And I often, those bad body image days do tie in around when I'm premenstrual,
Yes.
but I know that they're not permanent, but they do happen. And I want to name that because I think it can be easy when you are in an eating disorder to think that once you're recovered, you will never have those days or those thoughts about your body.
Mm-hmm.
And you do, but they just don't consume you. Similarly, I still have days where I will eat beyond fullness or I will
Mm-hmm.
emotionally eat. That's okay as well, because I acknowledge, okay, I've eaten beyond fullness today, and then I move on. I don't add another layer.
Yes.
It ends there. It doesn't become like another, don't add a story to it about why
Yes.
that's bad and why I'm a bad person. Similarly, if I'm feeling down one day and I do decide to eat something as a form of comforting, I
Mm.
accept that's okay to do that. And it doesn't then spiral onto the next thing and the next thing. And it doesn't turn into a binge because I am accepting of occasionally having food as a form of comfort
Yeah.
or as a way of self-regulating. But it isn't the only way of self-regulating. Whereas
Mm.
when I was living with an eating disorder, it was the only way of
Yeah.
self-regulating. I just think that's really important to mention because
Yeah.
they do still exist, but it's just not consuming. And actually, it's really interesting saying that because I was driving back from work yesterday. I'm so tired, so incredibly tired. For the listeners, I work night shifts and I'd done a 9 hour night shift and I hadn't had a lot of sleep the night before, so I was pretty drained. I was ready to just get back home and just get straight into bed. And as I was driving home, I got stuck at some traffic lights, and to the right of these traffic lights, there was a McDonald's. My brain went like, just go and get a load of food. It's
Mm,
literally for a fleeting second,
yes.
I had this thought. I could drive into McDonald's now and get a load of food and binge
Mm-hmm.
on it.
Mm-hmm.
But it was so fleeting. And as soon as I had that thought, I was able to go, it's because you're really tired right now. Your body
Yeah.
needs to go home and have sleep. And it's the reason it's saying that is because it thinks that if it goes to McDonald's and gets a load of food or binges on McDonald's, then it's getting a lot of calories and it wants that energy because it
Mm.
doesn't have a lot of energy right now.
Mm-hmm.
And because I was able to recognize that, I just carried on driving, got home, went into bed, and woke up like 8 hours later and felt loads better for having slept and didn't
Yeah.
have an urge to binge. But the
Yeah.
reason I highlight that is because these thoughts can still pop in there. I
Yeah.
think once we have lived with an eating disorder and our brain has learned to think in certain ways and it's learned
Mm-hmm.
to be able to use food as a way of self-regulating or as something to jump onto when you are very tired and you need rest, it can do that. It can do that again and again, but it's about being able to recognize why it's doing that. And you can acknowledge that thought, but don't need to give it the same kind of airtime that it used to get. Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I experience the same in terms of noticing when my body image is lower, but also noticing those certain thoughts around food, those old thinking patterns. And normally I have the awareness now, as you speak of, I know it's because I am tired or my mood's not great or I'm feeling low. And so your brain just doesn't have the same oomph to combat these thoughts. So it's automatically just going to go to what it knows. And this absolutely lessened so much for me in recovery to a point I'd very much say that I think for me now, which I think is pretty much what you were saying, is I am far better at zooming out in these moments
Mhm.
rather than feeling like they're all consuming, whether that's in terms of body image or food, where they used to totally take over and feel like this is the truth, this is how I'm feeling, this is how I'm always going to feel. It's the way we respond to these thoughts.
Mhm. Yes.
That's what it's about. Having them is one thing, but it's when we attach and we make it mean something about us, that's when it becomes that's when it takes a hold of us and it gets a grip and it becomes something that's powerful versus the ability to move on. And that's what recovery is very much for me. It's being able to move on from these things.
Yeah. 100%. I think you should keep that in because that made perfect sense. It really did. And I think it's helpful sometimes to hear somebody in their process of making sense of something. Because what you said, again, it feels like the same thing, but your way of interpreting it is being able to zoom out.
Mm,
Whereas the way I word it is I don't add a story to it. I don't add
yeah.
then like
Yes.
a story onto that one thought.
Hmm.
But again, it's the same thing. For me in recovery, meditation really helped with this. I know
Mm.
not everybody is a big meditation fan, and I don't meditate nearly as much as I used to at all. But at one point in my recovery, I was really committed to a daily practice of meditation. I think it helped to serve that purpose of not adding a story to the thoughts and
Mm.
being able to just step back a little bit from the thoughts and recognize that there is a little bit of space in between the
Mm.
thoughts. And if we can allow us to create more space between those thoughts, then we don't add the story to them.
That's exactly it, isn't it? It's creating space between you and your thought. Because when we're in that moment, we buy into it, don't we?
Yeah.
And it's being able to offer ourselves space. So, what I actually would be curious to know from you, Becca, is was there periods of time before you recovered where you perhaps thought that you'd healed your relationship with food or you were in the process of making changes, but looking back, it was not the case?
Yes. 100%.
Yes.
I believe the term people use for this is quasi recovery. Am I right?
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think.
yeah. No, I think you're right.
Quasi recovery? We'll go for quasi recovery. I think if you look up the definition of quasi recovery, it talks about your behaviors, certain eating disorder behaviors have changed, but the mentality is still there,
Yeah.
I believe. But for me, there is a particular time in the recovery process that I found this particularly relevant because I went to see a hypnotherapist for some support with my binging and purging. And we had about 6 sessions, I think. We did a lot of work, which was regression work. So it's inner child work, going back
Mm.
to when was the first time I felt guilty? When was the first time I felt like I'd done something bad? But the big one was the first time I'd felt guilty. And we went back into that and I spoke to my inner child and said what I needed to hear at that time in that moment to help me not feel guilty. I explain that because I don't want people to think of the hypnotherapy that you often see where it's like brainwashing you into eating less, that kind of thing. It was
Yes.
not that kind of
Yes.
hypnotherapy
Oh God,
at all.
I remember that. I remember my mom doing like a listening to a
Mhm.
CD about that. I remember that. Mm.
Yeah, it wasn't that kind of hypnotherapy. It was, very therapeutic inner child
Hmm.
work, hypnotherapy. And after this, I stopped purging.
Did the urge just go away?
The urge just went away and I just
Wow.
stopped. So I did think I was recovered at that
Mm.
point until I started to realize I was restricting more and had
Oh.
moved into doing a lot more exercise. And the body obsession, the thoughts around food, that was all still there. And then after some time, the binging also came back. The purging still did never come back. So I will say I never
Mm.
actually continued to purge through self-induced vomiting. I just want to be clear, that's the kind of purging I'm talking about here.
Mm.
But there was still restriction, excessive exercise, very occasional laxative use. So it wasn't it wasn't the recovery that I believed it was.
Mm.
But at the time, because that one behavior had disappeared, I
Mm.
felt like I had recovered. So I guess that's the whole quasi recovery piece of the behavior
Yeah.
changing, but actually mentally there was still a lot going on there. But I was thinking about this term, quasi recovery, and this experience, and how helpful is it to refer to it as quasi
Mm.
recovery? Because now I have hindsight and I look back at that experience and I just see that experience as part of the recovery process. That hypnotherapy served some function and some
Hmm.
purpose in my
Hmm.
recovery. And that was that it somehow stopped me purging. And it did help with some feelings of guilt. And then later on, I had to do work to change other areas of recovery. But isn't that just part of the process that some
Yeah.
things work and
Yeah.
some things don't? And there's a period of time where you plateau and maybe
Hmm.
and you stick at a certain point and you feel like you're a little bit stuck and then you try something else and then something else shifts and then you get stuck at that new place for a while and you let everything marinate there and then something
Yeah.
else changes. I don't know how helpful the term quasi recovery is because it can give this perception of you failed.
Mm.
Oh, you thought you were recovered and you're not, so you failed. Whereas actually, if we just say, oh, that's part of the recovery process, that's how it happens, then we don't add that failure message to it. I don't know what you think about it.
And I also wonder if there's part of it about like wanting to label ourselves, wanting to put ourselves into a category, like to help us figure out where we stand. Because I think there's so much unknown in recovery. There's so much messaging out there, isn't there? And everyone's done a different thing, and everyone's telling you one thing, and then someone's telling you another, and it conflicts, and it can feel really hard to figure out
Hmm.
what you're doing, how you even take a step forward. And a lot of it completely disregards the nuance of everyone's experience and what we have that we're carrying with us. And so it's that you get back up and you keep trying again. And that is the part of recovery itself, isn't it? Even as we spoke about at the beginning about, like, for me, this level of commitment to it when I invested in support, that felt very significant for me about recovery. But there was other things that happened prior to that were definitely chipping away at things. I will say that I don't know if I would call it quasi recovery. I got sucked into wellness culture and this clean eating, and I did notice for a good period of time that my urge to binge lessened. And I thought,
Mhm.
like, this is because I'm eating clean. I'm not eating processed foods and I'm exercising and I have energy. And it only lasted a few months before the binging came back. They were cheat days. That was what
Mm,
I did. It felt like I was living the 80-20 balance that they talk about. People talk about live 80-20. You can have the
mm,
20% of foods that you shouldn't have, and the 80% is the good stuff. In that period of time, I really did think that I wouldn't binge again. I don't know. I felt like I discovered something, but it didn't last because the cheat days became cheat weekends and it
mm,
just extended. It became harder and harder to come back from them. But as you say, I remember feeling so defeated all the
mhm.
time with it, always
Yeah.
trying to do something. And I think that, as you say, it all has its place in the end.
Mm. Oh yeah, absolutely. I think it's very easy when you're in the middle of the recovery
Mm.
process to feel like nothing's happening, but usually there is, even if it's just you're digesting things from elsewhere
Mm.
and you're letting them sink in. That's
Yeah.
all contributing to readiness to make some other change, and
Yeah.
it's all kind of marinating
That's
in
exactly, I was going
the.
to say that. I was like, it's marinating.
It is. It is.
It
Um,
is.
and this is why I think I'm a bit icky with the word with the term the quasi recovery
Mm.
because it does suggest this. Oh, you failed at
Yeah.
something,
Nice
and
try, but not quite. Mm.
and that's just really demotivating, isn't it?
Mm.
And if you actually just take a different stance of, okay, this is where I'm at this moment in
Mm.
recovery, and that will probably change at some point. You're putting less pressure on yourself and
Mm.
you're more accepting of the different stages of that process.
Yeah, and I think as well, you get to decide recovery is for you, what you hope that looks like for you, and everyone has different hopes with that, don't they? Everyone has
Mm,
different things, and someone's journey may very well look different to yours. You do get to decide what
yeah.
how you want. What am I trying to say? Not the outcome, because that again signifies an end. What am I trying to say, Becca?
I think what you're trying to say is there is actually a really intuitive piece to recovery. You can listen to podcasts, you can see a therapist, you can read about all these approaches, etc., etc. But there is an intuitive piece to recovery, which is about what feels right for you.
Mm-hmm.
Because somebody else can say, I did X, Y, Z, but that might not be right for you.
Yeah.
And your body might be telling you something different. And it's
Mm-hmm.
about listening to that yourself and following what seems right and not comparing yourself to other people. I actually did a post about this around perfectionism in
Mm-hmm.
recovery and that there is no perfect way to recover and there's no perfect way to be recovered
Mm-hmm.
because it's
Yeah.
so unique and personal. And I think that's what you're getting at, Katie.
Yes, Becca, thank goodness you're here to make sense of my waffle or ramblings. Because my
I
brain goes
like a
too
waffle.
fast. My brain's thinking one thing, but I'm saying another. I'm going to work on that.
This happens to me a lot. Do you know what I do?
Oh,
I
God.
send myself lots of voice notes on WhatsApp because my brain is always going a million miles per hour and I have all these ideas and voice noting myself helps me because I'm like, I've got it there. I can't forget it now. It's on my voice notes and then I can move on.
Can you listen to your voice again? Because listening to my voice as you're trying to edit this podcast, it takes me a minute to get my head around. I do have my notes. My notes folder is very well used on my phone.
I used to hate listening to my voice. I think I'm a bit more accepting of it now because the first time I ever did any podcast episode, I didn't listen it back to it for 2 years.
Two
And
years!
the only reason I listened back to it was because I was going on another podcast and I thought I should probably listen to the first one. Um,
Oh, wow.
but I'm not too bad now because I think at uni we have to do so many skills practices and listen back to ourselves. I've got used to it. Still
Oof.
don't love it, but
No,
it is what
I
it is.
don't. It is what it is. I think that concludes our episode. Thank you so
I think
much,
so.
Becca. I actually finished. Thanks for listening, guys.
Yeah. Thanks for listening to us ramble for the second time.
All feedback is welcome.
Yeah, it would be really lovely if you're listening and you're in recovery or you class yourself as recovered to hear your thoughts of
Hmm.
what worked for you,
Yeah.
what profound moments of recovery did you have? And
Yeah.
because I think sharing is really helpful.
Yeah,
So yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, we really love to hear that. And you can either leave it in the comments if you're watching on YouTube, or you can send us an email. We would love to hear from you over there as well. What is our email, Becca?
Oh, good question. Let me
It
double check.
is podcast.onceuponabinge@gmail.com.
There we go. Katie is much better than me. She knows our email address.
I contribute.
Thank you for listening.
Thanks, guys.
We hope to hear from you. Bye.
Bye.